We're going to talk about finding genes for ESP. So most psychological traits have genetic basis. Anomalous experience and shamanism probably have genetic basis. Shamanism's been practiced for the last 60,000 years. That's plenty of time for it to have had evolutionary effects. Many folklore traditions say that ESP is inherited, and here's a Scottish study that shows that's the case. So here's a gene hunting strategy, and you and I could use this, and we could use this to determine whether there's ESP genes. I'm not going to ask any research questions that I can't answer. So we could, if we wanted to, we could answer the question, is there a genetic basis for ESP? Here's our recipe. Okay, we need an evolutionary theory explaining the gene. I'm going to present two theories. We're going to think about them at the end. I'm going to revise them. Okay. Identify phenotypic markers. In my case, it's going to be questionnaire items. This is in relationship to the genes. Conduct a community survey. Okay, regular people from the community. Analyze results using correlational mapping. What's that? That's mapping where we arrange the data points, each data point in relation to all the other data points on the basis to their correlation with each other, so that the data points that are closest have the highest correlation. That's correlational mapping. And the theory is, if your evolutionary theory is correct and you're selecting the variables from the theory, then you do this correlational mapping. Where there's clusters, that's going to signify an underlying allele, or a gene that varies by the nature of the process. Okay? Then when you're finished, you revise the theories in response to your findings. That's the present state. That's what I'm going to be reporting on right now. In order to find the genes, you obtain DNA from the individuals who have the phenotypic markers or who respond in the way that you want to the questionnaire item. You obtain DNA from first-order relatives. You give it to your biological friends. They compare. They come up. What they would do is they come up with a candidate list of alleles. Okay. Then you replicate the study with another ethnic group and with another ethnic group, and you've found your ESP gene. Okay. Once you have it, you can use reverse phenotyping. You figure out what it actually does. You can make progress. We've been going to these meetings for decades. This is a way we can make real progress. If you had a gene, you'd have something real. It would put parapsychology on the map. Okay, so here's our plan. We're going to make theories. We're going to find common unusual experiences. We're going to devise questionnaire items. We're going to give the questionnaire to a community sample. We're going to do correlational mappings. Going to revise the theory. Long time ago, in the 1980s, I did a study of shamans. Okay, I interviewed about 36 shamans. What's the pattern that unifies all the stories? Well, the one thing, I just wanted to look at you a little bit. The one thing that unifies all those stories, those shamans I interviewed, was anomalous experience. That's how their life started off. Then they were socialized to become shamans. The other thing was that all the shamanic rituals involved hypnotic suggestion and placebo effects. That's why it worked. I mean, there could be paranormal phenomena, but when they do the ceremonies, hypnotic suggestion and placebo effects were what seemed to make it work. So that led to what I call a ritual healing theory. Here's how it works. Childhood shama leads to, and I call these shamanic variables, absorption, dissociation, hypnosis, and some other variables. All of these areas are axiomatic. The variables lead to anomalous experience. This is a correlation. There's about a dozen studies. The correlation's in the neighborhood of 0.3 or 0.4. It's a very replicable experiment. The anomalous experiences lead to shamanic beliefs. This is known as the experiential source theory. Okay? People have the experiences that leads to some powerful beliefs. How do you test that theory? Right here in this room, there's people in this room who have had many, many extrasensory experiences. That has produced powerful beliefs. Belief in spirits, souls, life after death, magical abilities. Spirits, souls, life after death, magical abilities. It's not really a matter of belief for these people. They know. They know. And that capacity of knowing, if they are socialized to be a shaman, they can be a shaman and produce rituals. The rituals produce the placebo and hypnotic effects, and you have a cycle. The people who respond to the rituals have certain genetic, according to the theory, this has genetic basis. The people who respond to the shaman rituals survive. People who don't respond have a lower potential for survival. So over the last 60,000 years, this cycle has been going around. We have been selecting for genes. Okay, now I haven't defined exactly how to measure these, but we're going to look into that. That's how the study works. So parapsychologists didn't like the theory so much because you don't really, where's the ESP? You're not buying into this well enough or something. So here's another theory, sheep theory. Sheep theory says you've got your ESP alleles, that leads to experiences, that provides benefit. The alleles are selected for. You've got a sheep theory. So now we have two theories. We're in business. We can continue our research project. Okay, in 1980s to 1996, I had my students ask respondents, if you've had a very unusual experience, would you describe it? Collected over 1,500 narratives. We categorized the narratives. We got apparitions, waking ESP, paranormal dreams, out-of-body experience, near-death, sleep paralysis, spiritual healing, psychokinesis, UFOs, religious experiences, and then we created another category. Okay, these are our questionnaire variables. How often have you had the following experiences? There's our list that we ask the people. The list is dependent on empirical research, so we know that a large number of people have had all those things. This is what led me to do the present study. In 1989, Murawski and Ross did a study where they used correlational mapping, which I plan to use. Okay, they measured 81 psychological variables, which they categorized in 11 diagnostic categories. Example, paranoia, schizophrenia, phobia, depression, anxiety. Okay, and they had a method for analyzing this data. And the method involved the configuration of the data. Did it fall into a galaxy pattern, a nebula pattern, or a spectrum pattern when you did the correlational analysis? Okay, because if it falls into a galaxy pattern, that suggests that the variables don't share alleles. Okay, if it's a nebula pattern, that's like a skeptical argument. They do share alleles. And so maybe the psychiatric diagnoses aren't valid if they're all mixed together. Spectrum pattern, they're overlaying on each other. That would imply that some other variable causes them to be highly correlated. Well, in my present study, I'll just use that same method of analysis. I got X equals anomalous experience. O will be the psychological symptoms. Plus will be the shamanic variables. Okay? If it falls in a galaxy pattern, that supports the sheep hypothesis. Because the sheep, they believe that the wonderful extrasensory perception is not the same as psychosis. They're separate. They shouldn't be mixed together. If they are mixed together, if they're the same thing, that would be a skeptical hypothesis. If they're layered on each other, that means some other variable causes them to be highly correlated. That would support the ritual healing theory, which is the first one I put on the board. Okay, so here's what Murawski came up with. There was a nebula configuration. The psychiatric variables are mixed up with each other. So that challenges the DSM paradigm. So even though this study is presented to all graduate students, the DSM paradigm, our method of diagnosing the diagnostic categories, we use it anyway, even though it's not really very suitable for research. But my question is, where's ESP on the spectrum? Where's out-of-body experience? Where's our list? How are these variables, if we did a correlational analysis, where would they fall? Would they fall in the center? Would they be mixed up? Would they be, how would it be arranged? And I don't think, I really did not know. Okay, one never knows, does one? Says the great blues musician Fats Waller. We don't really know, but we can find out. Okay, here's how we do it. We have a study questionnaire. First item is going to be the unusual variables. We've already went over. We'll use Murawski and Ross's psychological symptoms. Here's what I call shamanic variables: Telegon absorption scale, dissociated experience scale, transliminality scale, boundary questionnaire. I had to use selected variables because there's finite space available the variables were selected due to their correlation with hypnotizability, which I thought was central to my theory. Okay. Variables predicted of psychopathology, I threw them in because I wanted to get a scale, I wanted to get a reference, I wanted to see the correlational mapping would show how strong my variables were compared to things which were supposed to be predictive of psychopathology. Childhood difficulty, satisfaction with life scale. The John and Henry scale is designed for African Americans, and my sample is predominantly African Americans. I'm in Northeast North Carolina. Gender, age, ethnicity, employment. Somewhere there's income. It's got it. There it is. There's the income. Income is known to be perhaps the best predictor of mental disorder. So we'll put that on the questionnaire. Questionnaire is given to 865 people over a number of years. 73% were African American. These are poor people. It's Northeast North Carolina. Whoops. Here's the incidence of experienced paranormal dreams, 66%. UFOs, 10%. And you see the spectrum. The question is this particular sample different from other groups? Well, I previously had done a random sample study of Elizabeth City State University students, my college, so we knew the incidence. This is the same incidence as the students had. That's the same incidence, or very similar to University of Maryland students and to University of North Carolina Greensboro students. So there's no reason to think these students are radically different, except for sleep paralysis. African Americans have a higher incidence of sleep paralysis for some reason. That was part of my study, hypotheses related to another study, because we were interested in sleep paralysis and high blood pressure, whether there would be a correlation. And there was not, to our surprise. Well, they replicated, my study replicated Murawski and Ross's symptom wheel. It had a nebula configuration. And then the question is, where will the unusual experiences be located on this map? So here's the answer, our first answer to a research question. Here's what it looks like. Let's see how my laser will do. Here are the unusual experiences. Is my laser clear enough for you? Here's all the psychological variables. Here's all the psychiatric, the schizophrenia variables. All our unusual experiences are clustered together right above the schizophrenia symptoms. Okay, so there's your answer. So that's strange, but William Everett, in his previous study, talked about childhood trauma and mediums, showed a correlation, and so we shouldn't be too surprised. And Alexandra Para talked about mediumship and schizotypy, saying there's a correlation. There's a lot of evidence showing that the propensity for unusual experiences is correlated with these symptoms, which are related to psychosis. And so this is what the data shows. And so I adjusted my brain thinking, okay, better start thinking along these lines. There's a real connection between the things we're most interested in. Here's our, whoops, let's see, I messed up my thing. Here's ESP right here, okay. Here's apparitions, here's paranormal dreams, all lying above the schizophrenia. Let's continue our analysis. Here's another chart, schizophrenia symptoms, shamanic variables, unusual experiences. This has a spectrum configuration, okay? That supports the ritual healing theory. That was our plan, right? Here's our unusual experiences. Here's our schizophrenia symptoms. Here's our shamanic variables, forming a very tight cluster, all grouped together. Here's difficulty in childhood and difficulty in adolescence, these two places. Here's the UFOs down here. Somehow this wraps around. Let's look at another analysis. Well, here's our finding. The spectrum configuration supports the ritual healing theory. Childhood trauma, stress probably causes high correlations among schizophrenia symptoms, shamanic variables, propensity for unusual experiences. That causes that kind of layering phenomena. Unusual experiences do not share alleles with shamanic variables or schizophrenia symptoms. So it doesn't really support the skeptic hypothesis. Here's the big picture. We'll look at correlational clusters. What's clustered with ESP? Okay, here's our cluster right here: waking ESP, paranormal dreams, apparitions, possible shared allele. Not a very tight cluster. Let's look at another analytical configuration. Here's another cluster. The small cluster has waking ESP, apparitions, out about experience, and then we look at a larger cluster here, has waking ESP. So here's our phenotypic markers. Perhaps waking ESP, apparitions, paranormal dreams, OBE. That kind of fits in with the ritual healing theory. It's not a very tight cluster, but I don't know, we'll talk about this later. Oh, here's a note. ESP and PK are not clustered. So our variable psi is not a valid variable. It's not a true, doesn't cluster together naturally. That was just something of convenience. I'm not sure what we can say about that. Here's the big picture. We'll look at all the variables in the study, and you'll notice here on the left is age, income. They're correlated. It's correlated. Here's our psychiatric variables. But our variables, our ESP and other things like that, and our shamanic variables are highly clustered with the symptom variables here, surrounded by the circle line. Okay, now here's the twist in the story. The story has a strange twist to it. While I'm working on this, I'm thinking, wow, extrasensory perception seems to be related to psychosis, and millions of dollars are being spent to locate the genes connected with psychosis. They're going to come across our ESP genes for us naturally. We won't have to pay a penny. Okay, all during the 1990s, 2000, 2010. They're not finding major alleles connected with schizophrenia. Now they're telling us that maybe there's hundreds of genes connected to schizophrenia. None of them of particular importance. It's a heartbreaking finding for these researchers. Okay, they failed to locate major schizophrenia alleles, but they did find a gene connected with intelligent absorption scale. And of course, my ritual healing theory predicts that. I predict that they'll find some more. I predict this is available for us to find. Here's a theory which explains this phenomenon, the Keller and Miller polygenic mutation selection theory. They hypothesize that consciousness has an evolutionary added-on factor. In other words, we're going through this progression, a small brain, larger brain. Consciousness is evolving, and layers of modules are being added on over time, like the ability to symbolize and to use linguistic ability. Series of modules have been added on during the evolutionary process. Random mutations disrupting earlier modules cause dysfunctions in later modules, because the brain's a really interconnected whole. Okay, the theory of module hasn't been proven, but it allows me, I can make a schematic diagram to illustrate what they're saying. Say there's a random mutation here in an earlier module. That's going to cause disruptions in a later module, more disruptions. Say there's an absorption shamanic module here. That leads to maybe we'll have ESP and PK. If not, maybe we'll have psychosis or maybe other disorders in the later modules. It's caused by random mutations, not specific genes. So here's an alternate theory. Random mutations are the source, possible source of ESP and PK. Okay. Here, I explain the polygenic mutation selection theory and say, well, we need to make a revised theory. Here, I'll read the middle one here. The polygenic mutation selection theory explains the genetic basis, universal features, sporadic nature, ongoing incidence, and correlation with psychosis of anomalous experiences, assuming that a disruption of normal consciousness facilitates anomalous perception. And that's what Morris Friedman was saying to you, and et al., his group were saying this morning. Disruption of normal consciousness may be what really is going on here. Let's look at a revised theory. Sheep theory, we'll just leave it the way it is because we haven't really generated evidence to refute it. If this theory is valid, it should be very easy to find these genes. Okay, that's something to think about. We could get together and pass out questionnaires, identify people, find the gene. Okay. Let's think about the Gansfeld and Eastern traditions. Normal consciousness inhibits the reception of extrasensory information. Eastern mystical traditions argue that normal consciousness clouds perception of ultimate reality. So random mutations disrupt normal consciousness, and sometimes these disruptions are sporadic and temporary. Shamanic propensities have evolved to cope with these disruptions. We have like the wounded healer syndrome. You have problem, too many random mutations. What do you do about it? You become a shaman. Okay? So let's come up with a revised theory. Here's the revised ritual healing theory. We've got the random mutations here, stress, trauma. Here's our psychosis, here's schizotypy. We'll make a little bar here. You know, our previous people, like Ingo Lambret, he talked about a continuum of the mastery of voices. Here's our continuum. Chris Rowe talked about experiencing, experience led to practice. So here we have socialization, shamanism, shamanic variables around. Here's our cycle going on for 60,000 years. Chris Rowe talked about experiencing process. William Everest talked about childhood trauma and mediums. The papers we're presenting coincide with this theory, so here's my revised ritual healing theory, and I'm open for questions.
Okay, first, really briefly, I would caution you in being surprised that ESP and PK don't cluster, because they may be very, very different things. Just because they're two things we can't explain doesn't mean they're not, in their own right, very different. But, moving on. All of the alleles that you're talking about are defined like by the mapping, the Human Genome Mapping Project, right? That's how these alleles are defined, the ones that have names and...
The alleles I'm talking about have not been found. We haven't found a gene for ESP.
But when you were saying like we'll question people and then we'll look at their DNA and we'll map the...
We'll pass out questionnaires. We'll identify a category of individuals who have a high incidence of extrasensory perception, out-of-body experience, like that. We'll give them, take DNA samples from those people. We'll give the questionnaire to the family members and locate a family member who has had no experiences, take their DNA. That then becomes a case.
And then you're just comparing the whole genome, all of the DNA in the people who do have the experience compared to all of the DNA compared in the people that don't have the experience.
Yeah, and we'll need to gather a number of cases.
Yeah, but when you do that, you're using primers and things based on known gene sequences, right?
I assume so, yes.
And all we know, all the genes we know are genes that code proteins, right?
Okay, I'm not an expert. I'm going to give this DNA to my biological friends and let them do this.
Okay. I'll tell you, all the genes we know are genes that code for proteins. Yeah. But every cell in every body for eons have spent the cellular energy copying and making sure that the daughter cells have this 95% junk DNA that doesn't code for any proteins. So, but it does something. We keep bringing it along to every new cell. So if it's holding information about ESP that doesn't code for proteins, we'd never know. We'd never call it a gene because we just say it's junk DNA and throw it out. So if you're looking at the whole sequence, but that's, yeah, I know you're like a geneticist is going to do that, and that just seems like you're never going to find it, because if it's not a protein, and which I don't think it is going to be,
the problem you're describing is a problem that the schizophrenia researchers are facing right now. In others, they thought they could find a gene, but they did not find it. So now they're doing, but now that entails it hasn't worked for them.
Because it also might be in that junk DNA not coding for a protein.
It may not work for us.
Correct.
We might not find a gene connection.
I'm just saying, keep that in mind. There's a lot we don't understand about the 95% of the genome we keep around through evolution. So it must do something. That's all.
Okay.
Hello.
But from reading the literature, they're telling me, okay, if the gene exists, you can find it. If the gene exists, you can find it. Okay, go ahead.
Early on in your talk, you referenced and used the term placebo effect several times.
Yes.
I've been doing some maverick research for many years, and when I found a verifiable, repeatable, what I refer to as a syntropic effect in the sweet zone of the placebo effect. Now, what you're talking about, you seem to sweep the placebo effect, which is the outcome of many of these shamanic mystical experiences. You just kind of seem to sweep it away as it's an anomalous effect, perhaps all in your head type of experience. It has no physiology or actual physiological effect to it other than imaginatory effect as a placebo effect, which gets dismissed. I call it the placebosaurus, kind of like the gorilla in the room.
Okay. I didn't mean to sweep anything under the rug. I don't know. I do not, never really could figure it out or understand exactly what it is or define it perfectly. And hypnosis has a similar problem, I think. But there are people who are delving into this. The question as to the genetic basis of the placebo effect, that's beyond my understanding also. I'm not sure about that. But the genetic basis of hypnosis is pretty clear that it is findable. Yeah.
Yes, congratulations for your paper. My question is about the parental style in many shamans, and because we start in Argentina many studies in groups with mediums, psychics, healers, and also dowsers, for example. And the childhood trauma is a variable that impacts in the development of this kind of abilities. But we observe, for example, that the parental style, the treatment of the parents in the childhood of the psychics, healers, and so on, produce some kind of effect of the produce of this kind of experience in the adult life, right? My question is, what is your opinion, instead the genetic theory, the transgenerational styles or the parental style in this kind of people that produce experience or paranormal phenomena in the adult life?
Oh, I don't know about that. I work in a psychiatric hospital, and I know that childhood trauma leads to psychiatric problems. But I have talked to so many shamans, but they generally don't talk about their so much the childhood trauma. So I'm not sure.
No, okay.
I don't know.
But we observe the negligent parents. Maybe is a variable that module between the paranormal phenomena and the childhood trauma,
definitely.
some kind of effect. Right?
I'm borrowing my theory. I'm borrowing from the psychiatric literature. I'm borrowing from the stress diathesis theory with regard to psychosis. But that was when they thought there was a gene, so they thought that gene would explain the genetic basis. Now there isn't any, so this must be the random. But yeah, certainly the way a person is raised, person has a genetic propensity, and the way they are raised determined whether a disorder manifests. And I would assume it would determine whether the paranormal experience manifests. Yeah.
Due to the shortness of our time, I'll limit myself to commenting that your argument about halfway through the talk for which type of clustering would support which hypothesis ignores the fact that's been repeatedly mentioned in this conference that many kinds of anomalous experiences will lead to a misdiagnosis of psychopathology.
But wait a second. That's what they found. There's all these overlapping symptoms. So I don't see where there's a dilemma or a conflict. Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Stephen Kessler's book describes the relationship between certain kinds of pathologies and or gifts, including psychic gifts, related to the stage of development at which child develops the trauma. Can you comment on that?
Oh, that's beyond me. I don't know. I haven't read that book. Okay.